Well, welcome to WAY2B TV again. I'm glad to see Colleen and Jan are back on. There's several more watching. I don't know who they are exactly, but I'm glad to see everyone here. We had a good time last week, I think, and glad that some of you all are back, and I'm glad that maybe more will be coming back. Callers can call. Our contact information is right up here, but callers can call 863-940-0047. We can take one line at a time with one on hold, and that's all we can do right now until we can afford better equipment. Twitter is the best way. Tweets show up right on the screen. The chat room is open, and between broadcasts, interact at way2b.org. Is our email address, and we do answer email in between broadcasts, but we don't answer email during the show. I forgot Joni last week, so I'm not going to forget her this week. She's right here. Huh?
You'll forget again.
Hope not. I hope not. Hope everybody can hear you this week. We're having feedback problems between Florida and Tennessee. We've worked on it for days, and we're both wearing earbuds today so that we can hear each other. And you should be able to hear us both. And if you can't, let us know on the chat room, because we surely would love to know if the broadcast is not going out. If either one of us can't be heard or is inaudible in some way, please do let us know, because then we can work on the problem. So we appreciate you being here. We begin each broadcast normally with a discussion starter. And tonight we begin with what I would call a challenge. And this is a challenge that we always have. The Sermon on the Mount defines the way to be. The way to be. The Sermon on the Mount is a series of things that I talk about that I call the way to be. And the Sermon on the Mount is the famous speech attributed to Jesus by the ancient writers. And that famous speech outlines a way to be content in life. And it outlines the problems with religion as well. Some of it does. And so the way to be is very important. And it's kind of interesting, because every time I teach the module on the way to be, everyone seems to embrace it right away. It's really an easy thing to embrace, and there really isn't much to argue about, because most people, I think in their minds that Jesus thought this way, and most of us know, what it means to be like Jesus, so to speak, and that is to be humble and kind and patient and gentle and peaceful and merciful and so forth. And he talked about all the various things, and he illustrated those things in the way to be. Now, without an understanding of the figure of speech, the kingdom of heaven, you wind up with a problem. You cannot fully understand the way to be taught in the Sermon on the Mount without first understanding what Jesus meant by his figure of speech, the kingdom of heaven. And so Jesus' stories make no sense without understanding this kingdom of heaven, if you will. Yet the problem is that many religious people, in the process of teaching the kingdom of heaven, I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this, they get upset. And the reason they get upset is because I don't speak of the kingdom of heaven as supernatural. And I really don't think that's the terms in which the kingdom of heaven is expressed in the second gospel. So where to start has always been an issue. And I've decided to begin with my own parody of the Sermon on the Mount. As I told you all last week, I bought a bale of hay and a pair of coveralls and a straw hat, and I sat down in front of a green screen, and I placed myself in a farmer's market, and I did a parody of the Sermon on the Mount. And in that parody, when I say, "You'll be content," that's me identifying the kingdom of heaven. So as I play this parody for you, this illustration, as our discussion starter, listen for the words content and contentment. That's simply me identifying the kingdom of heaven. And then we'll talk about the 32 occurrences of this figure of speech, the kingdom of heaven. I grew up in Tennessee around rural people in a very religious setting. I wondered, if a southern farmer raised in the rural church gave up religion altogether, what would he say to his neighbors? I call it the Sermon on the Hay. Everyone knows the bananas are not homegrown in Tennessee, but somehow they taste better coming from the farmer's market. My grandmother takes me often. Folks from town wander, each searching, feeling, and smelling for the perfect produce. Mason jars of preserves have ring lids clamping down a gasket cap. As I walk along the narrow aisles, blowflies pester me. The mixed smells of some ripe and some already rotting fruit permeate the air. More is buzzing about the market this morning than the blowflies. Most everyone seems to be at the other end. Curious about what is going on, my grandmother says, "Let's go see." When we draw near, we find that everyone is watching a young farmer. He has on bib overalls, a plaid shirt, and a straw hat. The young man is not saying anything, just wandering around, occasionally picking up produce. Squeezing, sniffing, he weighs it in the palm of his hand. A few sellers abandon their stations to join the growing group. Some appear to know who he is. "Who is that?" my grandmother asked a man in a yard chair. "His name is Tuck. He's been talking all around town. My boy and I heard him in front of the hardware the other day. He really has something to say. He makes a lot of sense." Eventually, Tuck sat down on a bale of hay. Someone turned off the farm report. One by one, everyone noticed him sitting there, his legs swinging. The market noise ceased. We could hear nothing but the creak of wooden beams overhead, struggling against their joints. The young man pushed back the brim of his straw hat, revealing his eyes. We could see he was struggling for words. With a worried look, he pressed his lips together and exhaled a burst of air through his nose, as if he had no right to speak. Finally, he began. "We could all be content, you know. Folks seem to be the most content when they know nothing at all, especially about spiritual things. We are more content when we measure our own condition, not somebody else's. Everybody's strange except for you and me, and I worry about you most of the time. If we could be gentle with one another, we would appreciate what we receive, without taking it away from each other. If we really want to know what's right, we could be content with the fact we never really know it all. Certainly not enough to go around saying what's right for others. When we respond in kind less often, others respond to us in kind less often. We could even be content to offer charity for the wrong others do to us. We are most content when we shuck each other's peas, even if our own beans are waiting. Whatever else we desire, we should want peace between each other. That makes everybody more content. It's the way we want to be remembered. What if we had this way about us? Each of us would be a gift to others. We'd be refuge for those who seek shelter in us. We'd be a bright spot in everybody's darkness. The result would be, because of us, this way of being would be real to others. Everybody would be thankful for you and me if we had this way about us. Now, don't hear me trying to tear down your religion. I don't want to do that. Instead, I want to talk with you a few moments about a better way, a way of being that is fuller and richer than religion. Those who do their best at religion may be good folks. But did you know those who do their worst at religion might be good folks too? Even so, I'm telling you, unless you do better than religion, you'll never really be at peace inside. This way I'm talking about is a way of being, not a way of doing. It's a journey on the inside of you. It's not a way to go through religious motions or keep some religious law forbidding some action. Let me give you a few examples. You know it's illegal to murder somebody. You heard it all your life. What if you managed your anger? Would you ever purposely kill another person? First you get angry, then you call names, and before you know it, somebody gets hurt. Just make friends as quickly as you can of anyone with whom you may be angry, and with anyone who may be angry with you. Remain at peace and stay out of court. Don't be angry. If you have this way about you, your actions can naturally follow your attitude. You'll be more content. I'm sure you know you shouldn't cheat on your spouse. What if you did not yearn after someone else? Would you look at another? Looking leads to touching. Touching leads to cheating. You'll wind up with no spouse at all. Just keep the promise you made to your family. Don't be lustful. If you have this way about you, your actions can naturally follow your attitude. You'll be more content. Religion teaches you to love everybody, while at the same time telling you who the bad folks are. Bad folks are the ones you don't like, and who don't like you. You say you love everybody. If you do, you'll bend over backwards to not take offense, and to accommodate whoever wants from you. You'll do so most of all for the ones who don't like you and for the ones you don't like. Just love every other person. If you have this way about you, your actions can naturally follow your attitude. You'll be more content. Don't do what you do to please religion. Do it because you're a genuine person. What you do and say should be the result of the way you are inside. If you want to be seen and heard, you have it backwards. It will not make you content. Let me share with you a few examples of just pleasing religion. When the offering plate goes around, good folks put something in it, right? What if you gave it some other time, such that none of your friends knew about it? What if some of your gifts are outside of religion? Making a show to be seen is just given to get. That's not genuine. Making a show to be seen is taking, not giving. If you have this way about you, your actions can naturally follow your attitude. Give quietly. You will be rewarded with contentment. The most reverent, righteous, and religious are those who know the loftiest words to pray, right? What if your prayers were private? None of your friends would hear you. Isn't that as it should be? Are you praying to be heard by your friends? There really is no need to pray in public or to repeat the same words over and over. There's a more humble way to pray. If you have this way about you, your actions can naturally follow your attitude. Pray quietly. You will be rewarded with contentment. Good religious folks sacrifice themselves, don't they? What if no one knew about your sacrifices? If you get up your neighbor's hay one evening, don't tell everybody up and down the road about it. Don't show up for dinner all hot and sweaty either. Shower and wear clean clothes. Put a smile on your face. Ask others around the dinner table about their day. If you have this way about you, your actions can naturally follow your attitude. Sacrifice quietly. Contentment will be your reward. Whatever it is you want, you want. Your attitude is your attitude. You have a choice. If you desire to be revered by others, being seen and heard will be your focus. If you desire to build character, concentrate on your private, inward way of being. You can't have it both ways. You can't be content while seeking human recognition. So why worry about your reputation or the necessities of life? Look at all the produce around us. We're never going to starve, as long as we love each other. When this old shirt of mine is about worn out, if I can't afford another, somebody with this way about them will give me one of theirs. Inside of us is a way to be that makes us more content and less worried. Each day has a new set of problems. Be patient. Our problems are solved through one another. Put your mind on improving yourself inside and let others do the same for themselves. Complaining about someone else is not going to make you more content. Neither will you be content by trying to make your point with those you already know disagree with you. Don't start arguments. Be content to tend to yourself. So when you need something, there are others with this way about them. They'll give to you what you look for. They'll help you find. The opportunities you need will be provided to you. You be this way and do the same for others. Just ask yourself what you wish were true about others and make it generally true about you for them. Now, not many will go this way. Most will find this way requires too much self-discipline. Look at the produce all around us here in the market. It's easy to see which fruit or vegetable is which, isn't it? We can tell by the color, the shape, the size, and even the smell. You folks raised in town, you might not have been able to tell one from the other when this same produce was just green shoots coming out of the ground. Eventually, though, the color and shape form, and over time, things ripen. Eventually, anyone can tell what's edible and what's not. Religion is like that. When things mature over time, we discover what is really there. When all is said and done, many will say, "Was I not religious? Did I not repeat the liturgy one day every week? Did I not give my money? Was I not there on work day?" They never had this way about them. They just wanted to be seen and heard by their friends who were also religious. So we all have a choice about our lives. Do you want a more resilient life? Those who can accept this way will be able to find contentment in easy times and in hard times. Those who cannot accept this way will perceive life very differently. For those who are not able to be this way, well, when times are not great, contentment will be tough to find. With these last few words, he was finished speaking. He pressed his palms against the hay, lifting himself to his feet. Then he pulled himself into his truck and drove away. Silence in the market gave way to a growing murmur. They were amazed at what he had to say. He spoke to them as if he knew what he was talking about, but not in the way their religious leaders claimed to know. The young farmer Tuck made sense. What you've just heard was a parody of the so-named Sermon on the Mount. Could life be so simple? The contiguous line of thought of an ancient speaker reportedly named Jesus appears to say yes, life is just that simple. Whether the speaker was a historical person or some imagined character in ancient literature, it is this contiguous line of thought that concerns us here. The story of the ancient speaker is not supernatural, but what it teaches about life and about being is still naturally super today. All right. Well, you can chime in with your questions whenever you get ready, and we will stop what we're talking about and address questions and comments. The figure of speech, the kingdom of heaven, for me, comes from a certain place where they were. In Jesus' day, there was no concept of this afterlife kingdom of heaven. The pearly gates and the streets of gold and the mansions, those sorts of things all came later in religion. The pearly gates and the golden streets especially are straight out of the book of Revelations, which was written at the end of the first century. And so Jesus never talked about those kinds of things, and the words for kingdom of heaven simply were not used as an illustration of anything to do with an afterlife. And I think religion just simply adopted those after the book of Revelations was written. So when you get right down to it, the Gospels mostly argue over, and scholars today argue over, did Jesus think he was the Messiah? Did he think he was going to be the king of a kingdom? And the kingdom that they waited for was a Messiah that was going to come. They were going to become the rulers, and they were going to rule over their oppressors. Their oppressors were going to become slaves and wind up with a bed of maggots covered by a blanket of worms in a place called Sheol. So, in reality, the argument in Jesus' day and the argument of scholars today is not over a kingdom of heaven at all, but over what was Jesus talking about and who did Jesus think that he was. And when you see the progression of what goes on in the Gospels, you realize that Jesus little by little, from the beginning of the Gospels, when it was written, the first Gospel that was written in Mark, from that point where he was this humble person who didn't want anyone to know about any kind of miracles that he did, who refused to show a sign to the religious leaders. He was not a show-off. He was humble. He was merciful. He was kind. And he was someone who made peace. And he was a gentle person. But by the time we get to John, almost to the end of the first century, the Gospel of John begins to depict him as someone who thinks he's God and all of that sort of thing. And scholars today, textual critics especially, simply have a problem with that. And so that's what I talk about. And the kingdom of heaven itself was a figure of speech. The kingdom, where is your kingdom? And then heaven, where is heaven? And of course, God on high, God up above, the Hebrew Old Testament phrases for God. These things are simply referring to God who is in this unknown place. And they saw the world as being flat. They saw it as having a ceiling, which was mostly blue, except on bad days when the weather was bad. But it was a ceiling, and beyond that ceiling was God, somewhere in the heavens. And the word for heaven, basileia in Greek, simply means sky or air. It's referring to the great expanses of what they saw when they looked up, and that's all. So heaven itself was this ethereal place where God might be. Now, kingdom itself was the kingdom that they hoped for, this kingdom where they would rule and they would no longer be oppressed people. They would no longer be conquered, going in and out of slavery. They would no longer have their own kingdom torn down. And so they were waiting on this stable kingdom that was going to be theirs. And it was called the kingdom of God by the other gospel writers, as in the kingdom, God's established kingdom on earth. It was not an afterlife thought. But in this one gospel, gospel number 2, I call it, let's look at that just a minute. G2 right there, that's gospel, that's Matthew, the way it was written. Let's see if we can go to a different screen. There we go. But this gospel, which later was named by religion the book of Matthew, but the G2 I call it, that gospel used the phrase the kingdom of heaven 32 times. And that gospel writer is the only gospel writer who used the phrase kingdom of heaven at all. And so I want to talk to you about the 32 occurrences of the kingdom of heaven, and then we're going to enter into a discussion. But I certainly would love for you guys to go ahead and ask your questions at any point in time that you would like to. Jen writes, could it be that the Gospels are describing a Jesus who is evolving over time? That is what some of the more fundamentalist Christians would say, that over time Jesus was evolving into this other person. If that is true, Jesus was getting substantially more arrogant as time went along, which is kind of hard to believe since his whole ministry was only 36 months. That would be a pretty big change and a pretty rapid change for a single individual. On top of that, the Jesus that they were promoting, of course, was a Jesus who was risen from the dead, and a Jesus that did miracles. And so it began to be embellished in stronger and stronger ways. In other words, the writers were simply trying to make of Jesus what they needed to make of Jesus for this book or these writings that would be the roadmap, if you will, for the Christian religion. I think some of them wrote in that way. Altogether, no one really wrote in that way. They each wrote independently until in the 4th century, religious leaders finally adopted. There was no particular vote or that sort of thing. But in 367 AD, a list appeared which was the New Testament books that we have today for the very first time. And so this was simply a migration of thought as they continued to build an attraction for the Christian religion. So anyway, as we go into the Gospels, let's take a look at what those stories say. There are 32 of them. The first are these phrases. The first one is not Jesus at all, but rather it is John the Baptist. If you look at it, you see, now in those days John the Baptist came preaching in the wilderness of Judea, saying, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." And that word repent, metanoeo, is the Greek word. Let's see here. Let's go back up here. Okay, metanoeo is the Greek word, and that Greek word simply means to change, to renew, to change one's purpose, to change one's thinking, if you will. And so that's the word metanoeo. And so he says repent, and that word repent itself is simply change, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Now, what does he mean by at hand? Nearby. It is soon, if you will. There's many people who think that Jesus and his followers thought that the end of the earth was going to come during their lifetime, and then it did not. I wonder if that's exactly so, but nonetheless, that's what they say about it. And the kingdom of heaven itself then was a matter of saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand, according to John. And then Jesus immediately picks up in it in the second occurrence of it. And after being baptized, from that time Jesus began to preach and say, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." Repent, for the kingdom of heaven again is at hand. And again, that word repent simply means change, to change one's mind or purpose. That's the origin of it. You can see the meaning right above my head up there. It says meaning, to change one's mind or purpose. And so when you think about it, is how do you change your mind, and change your mind from what to what, and so forth, and so forth. So then the third occurrence, blessed are the poor, and this is the opening salvo of the Sermon on the Mount. And he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, the word blessed is markarios. That's this Greek word right here. Markarios, or markarioi there, but the root of it is markarios. And it means happy, blissful, joyful, okay? So joyful are the poor in spirit. And I know all my life I've heard, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who are downtrodden, blessed are those who are sad, blessed are those who are, down on their luck, whatever. So happy are the sad, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And that's not really what it says at all. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Poor is lacking. The word spirit is pneuma. And there's pneumati right here. It's a form of it. Pneuma. And that particular Greek word is the same word used 269 times in the New Testament. And it refers to the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit. Blessed are those who are lacking in spiritual knowledge. Blessed are those who are lacking in spiritual things, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So, referring back to the Sermon on the Mount, which we'll get into in greater detail later, blessed are those who are humble about what they think they know about spiritual things, for they shall be more content than other people. And I think that's very true, and we see that. And if someone shows up all full of the Spirit, if you will, and claiming to be all full of the Spirit, and all full of righteousness, we don't wind up thinking it's righteousness they're full of, do we? We wind up thinking that they're an arrogant person. And so that's what Jesus was saying, the humility that we have before God and before one another, which is blessed are those who mourn, which was the second beatitude. But that's the third occurrence of the kingdom of heaven. The fourth occurrence are blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This is also in the Sermon on the Mount. It comes right after the Beatitudes, or right in the Beatitudes. Some people include it as a beatitude, if you will. But he's simply saying, blessed are those who are uncomfortable or suffer discomfort for the sake of adopting this way of being content, for adopting this right way of being inside. For theirs is contentment, is peace inside. And so again, markarios, blessed are those, joyful are those who suffer discomfort for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And then the fifth occurrence is, this is a very interesting verse to me, because it says, whoever then annuls one of the least of these commandments and so teaches others shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever keeps and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Now think about that for a minute. In other words, if you teach these commandments that he taught, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the gentle, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, blessed are the merciful, blessed are the pure in heart, blessed are the peacemakers, the Beatitudes, if you will. If you teach these, follows the Beatitudes. If you teach these commandments well, then you shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. And if you teach these commandments poorly, then you will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Now, if it's an afterlife kingdom of heaven, think about it. Either way, you're in the kingdom of heaven. How can one be least and the other one be great? How can one be less than the other? And how can both people be in the kingdom of heaven, this afterlife that's a reward for keeping and teaching these well, according to Christian tradition? So in other words, the person who's able to adopt this way of contentment gets less fulfillment out of it, less contentment out of it. And the person who learns this way of contentment well and adopts it well and internalizes it well, then they get great contentment and greater fulfillment out of it. Now this verse makes sense, doesn't it? The kingdom of heaven is a way of contentment. The kingdom of heaven is this sovereign place within yourself, this unknown place where do we say God is? You abide in me and I abide in you, and so forth. Where do we say God is? God, we say we are the house of God and God lives in us. As Christians, if we talk about where God is, we talk about God is within you and God is within me. All right? And so if you believe in that type of God, the God that lives within you, then in that sovereign place within yourself where you adopt this way of being, that's heaven. Have you ever thought about that? And so the kingdom of heaven simply was not an afterlife kingdom of heaven. Then the sixth occurrence is, for I say to you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. And that comes right after where Jesus said, I came not to abolish the law, I came to fulfill it. Well, the law itself was a law of doing, 600 laws of doing in the Old Testament about what you can and cannot do. And most of those laws, or some of those laws, we still practice today. But an awful lot of those laws we've rejected because we no longer consider them practical. And so the law itself was a law of doing. The fulfillment of it was a shift from doing to being. And that is the kingdom of heaven. In other words, this contentment comes from a way of being, not a way of doing. You can walk the walk and talk the talk until you're blue in the face, but until you learn to manage your thoughts, you will not find peace inside. That's what he's talking about. And so it just keeps getting more and more interesting. We go on down, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. In other words, now, it's interesting to me, and you need to think about this for a minute, because that word enter, to go in, or to come into, to enter in, to reach, if you will, to go in. The words in the Greek, in the Greek language, there is no, for instance, where it says the kingdom of heaven, that's the basileia, this is the basileia tone uranos right there. All right, the kingdom of heaven. But one thing that that you need to understand is you have to make decisions about what the prepositions mean if they are there. And you have to also decide what the prepositions are when they're often not there. And so in heaven, there are several places where, well, 2 or 3 places where the kingdom of heaven is said, go into the kingdom of heaven, or go in the kingdom of heaven. And the words in or into are not part of it. All right? The word enter is here, and it means to come into, it's like anything else, to enter into, and it means more than a physical going from place A to place B. So you get the idea. All right. And I say to you that many shall come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. In other words, he was appealing to this thing that they wanted so bad. They wanted to be the rulers. They wanted to recline at the table of all the great rulers of the past. You know, Abraham was from long, long ago. Isaac was from long, long ago. Jacob was from long, long ago. And it was at a time when Israel ruled and where Israel had strong leaders, and God was having them slay other kingdoms and take their land and all that kind of stuff. And so this kingdom of heaven, this peace, if you will, these people were reclined at the table of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Obviously a metaphorical thing that he's talking about, not a literal thing of going to this ethereal place in the clouds and reclining at a table with Father Abraham. And let's go to the next one, because I don't want to stay. I'm not even halfway through. And we're going to get into the stories of the kingdom of heaven, and we're going to concentrate on them over the coming weeks. And as you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And again, this was Jesus talking to his disciples. As you go out and proclaim. That's what the word preach is, caruso. Go out and proclaim the contentment of the place where God dwells. Go out and preach the kingdom of heaven. All right. Truly I say to you, among those born of women, there has not arisen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. In other words, the one who has adopted the way, if you will, one who has adopted the peace inside that Jesus was talking about, that person is greater than John. John the Baptist, obviously, was quite a rebel. And I just assumed that's what he was talking about. And not some ethereal place in the clouds. And from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and violent men take it by force. And I've always looked at this and interpreted that as simply meaning that people in his day and people today simply are not satisfied with being content, but rather they go through life knocking down doors and pushing their way through life and trying to take things by verbal violence, if not physical violence. To you it has been, he said, to you it has been granted to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been granted. If the talk in that day was all about the kingdom of heaven, that was an afterlife kingdom, and it was a place beyond the clouds where God dwells, then what mystery is there? If that's what they claimed, if that's what they were talking about. The mysteries of the kingdom of heaven is just what I'm saying, in my opinion. It is simply saying that the kingdom of heaven is a matter of peace. It is a matter of the kingdom within your sovereign self where God dwells. And can you reach down in there and remold and remake your personality and your way of being to the point that you can find contentment no matter what circumstances you find yourself in. In other words, life does not eat your lunch all the time. Instead, you live in this world, you know how this world is, and you know how people are, and you can go through your day without it letting each and every person have an opportunity at ruining your day. Because it's up to you whether or not you be happy, Markarios, blissful, happy, joyful. Not up to everyone else. All right. He presented another parable to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. And you know the parable. The good seed was sowed, and people snuck in and sowed weeds among the wheat and so forth. In other words, he could teach this kingdom of heaven till the cows came home, but there would be always people who corrupt it. There would always be people who come in and spoil what he has said and put weeds in among it. It's just a parable about the kingdom of heaven. Otherwise, I don't know really how the kingdom of heaven would be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. When you get right down to it, there's nothing in the parable about this ethereal kingdom beyond the clouds with golden streets and pearly gates. And that's true of all 32 of these instances of the phrase, the kingdom of heaven. But instead, it makes sense if you understand that it's about sowing contentment and peace and gentleness and mercy, and there's always those that want to spoil it, and they come in and they sow tares among the wheat. He presented another parable to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field. And you know what that is. And the mustard seed grew, and it grew into a large plant, and the birds inhabited it. In other words, the kingdom of heaven grows within you. The kingdom of heaven grows within you. This contentment, this peace, this way of being grows within you. And it eventually grows into something big enough and strong enough that you become this non-anxious presence, and all the people around you are benefited by it. And so this kingdom of heaven is a figure of speech, simply talking about that place within yourself that you're trying to mold and make into that place where God dwells, where that, whatever you want to call it. I call it a natural God, not an unnatural God. I think we're all born with that God that dwells in there, that we can mold and make that part of us that would cause us to be more content no matter the circumstances, and would cause the other people around us to have a simpler and a better way to be around us. By the way, and we're about halfway through these, as we go through the other half, I want you to we're into these stories now. As we go through all of these things, ask yourself, where is the kingdom of heaven? Where is this place this unknown place where God dwells, that has pearly gates and golden streets, where you're going to go to be rewarded after you die? If you can find a place where it even seems to mention that, I'd like for you to point it out to me, because I'd love to know. It's simply not there. But for years, the church has taught, for millenniums, the church has taught that this kingdom is out there. And people say, do you know where you're going to, if you die today, do you know where you would spend eternity, and so forth? Well, how about if you live today? Do you know where you're going to be living? Do you understand how wonderful this life is? And if you live this life in the way that Jesus taught, you certainly would find it an easier place to live. Life does not stink, then you die and win the lottery. That's not what the kingdom of heaven is about. He spoke another parable to them. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 pecks of meal until it was all leavened. In other words, a little bit of it. Once you get into it, I hope I'm the person who puts that little bit of leaven in you, and you begin to think about it, and you gain your own thoughts about it. Not mine, your thoughts. You gain your own thoughts about it, your own way of being, and you understand that as that grows, it will infect your whole being. It will infect your whole being, and it will begin to affect the other people around you as well. And it's simply a parable about what effect that kingdom of heaven has on you. How can the ethereal place beyond the clouds, with pearly gates and mansions and golden streets, be like leaven? A woman took and hid in 3 pecks of meal until it was all leavened. I don't understand where that's coming from. I just think we've skipped over it because we've let the church tell us what to think. All right. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in the field, which a man found and hid, and from joy over it he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. In other words, I've always wondered why that man buried it in that field if he didn't own it, if he didn't own the field. And then he went out and sold everything he had and bought the field. But at any rate, it's a pretty good parable. But the parable simply talks about once you have the kingdom of heaven, it's like a hidden treasure. It's like something that you would sell all you've got to have it. And then the next one is kind of like this one. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking fine pearls. And if you look at the rest of it, you'll see it's the same way. And upon finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had, and he bought it. And again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet. And that's the next illustration. So the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet, cast into the sea, gathering fish of every kind. When they got the fish ashore, part of them were thrown back and part of them were kept. That's the parable. Now, could it be nothing more than Jesus is saying that some people adopt the way and don't keep the way? They don't hang on to the way, that the way comes and goes? I have a feeling that's true. That we adopt the way and we don't adopt it maybe we're the least in the kingdom of heaven, if you will. instead of the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, as he just described earlier in those other same sayings and early on in the Sermon on the Mount. But perhaps we just don't have the strength it takes to continue that way of living. I think we're afraid we'll lose. I think we're afraid that if we are humble before other people about what we know about spiritual things, I think if we're afraid, if we're humble toward each other about what we know about them. In other words, I know what's wrong with me, not what's wrong with you. And so I don't judge other people, or try not to. And so the kingdom of heaven is a different place. But some people are weak in that regard. And maybe they get into it a little bit and they find it too much trouble and they don't trust it. The truth is, the things that Jesus taught about the way to be cause you to be able to settle down within yourself. And no matter what comes your way, you realize that, as I've heard many a time said to different people, that's on them. That's on them. Don't take it inside yourself. That's on them. And you need to think that way. So the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet. And some be able to stay in that net that was cast, and some are not able to stay in that net that was cast. Then he said, therefore, every scribe who has become a disciple of the kingdom of heaven is like the head of a household who brings forth out of his treasure things new and old. The scribe was the religious leader of the day, scribes and the Pharisees. And that leader, when that leader adopts the kingdom of heaven and begins to teach it, I can remember when I decided that I was no longer going to teach. I went to seminary, and it started in seminary about 20 years ago. And I realized the kingdom of heaven was not what we were being taught at all. And it had nothing to do with what we were being taught at all. And it was not a carrot to be held out against hell, which was the stick. But rather the kingdom of heaven was about teaching people how to become inside in such a way that they could live this life no matter what was thrown at them. And so when this scribe, when this religious leader decides that it's time to be a disciple and teach these tenets of the kingdom of heaven, then he's like the head of a household who brings forth out of his treasure things new and old. Suddenly he's got something to say that actually benefits people in this life, and I think that's interesting. And again, I can't find the above the clouds streets of gold and pearly gates and mansions in that one either. And then he said, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Well, if heaven is inside you, which I think that's what it is, then what I bind outside of me, that is, if I respond in kind, I let other people get to me, and I breach this way of being that I know full well will make me happier, then I've loosed it on earth. But if I hold it within myself, when I bind it within myself, I bind this kingdom of heaven within myself, I'm my own person, and I'm not going to allow other people to make me into somebody else, no matter how abusive or ugly they get, then, by Jove, I have bound it in heaven, haven't I? And I think that's what that verse means. I do. All right, and at the same time, the disciples came to Jesus, who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And most of you all know the rest of this. The who is great in the gracious, it is 20 minutes after 8. Unreal. Who's greatest? And he called a child unto himself and set him before you. And truly I say to you, unless you're converted like children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven at all. And then whoever humbles himself as this child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So it's about humility. How can a person become like this child and not be great in the kingdom of heaven? The kingdom I'm talking about, the place I'm talking about, that a child is a person who is trusting and has not yet allowed the world to enter in. An adult can't hardly play. Have you ever noticed that? Some adults can, but a lot of adults can't. And yet a child can just let themselves go and play and enjoy the day and be that kind of person. And so that's 3 more instances of the kingdom of heaven right there. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a certain king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. And this was about the oh shoot, my mind's going. This is about the slave who would not forgive the person who owed him, and yet the king had forgiven him, and about the difference between a person who receives and gives away, and also then gives to other people, and passes, if you will, pay it forward. This is what it's about. We're going to have to move on because we only have about 10 minutes. For there are eunuchs who were born that way from their mother's womb, and so forth. Some who made themselves eunuchs, some were made eunuchs by men. This was a parable that some, for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, made themselves eunuchs. And those who made themselves eunuchs in the kingdom of heaven simply were saying that the reason they became eunuchs, that is, the reason that they were no longer able to do the kinds of things that you could do if you were not a eunuch, was because maybe they couldn't control themselves, or it was simply a matter of they wanted to be at peace themselves. And so it is a parable that Jesus taught, and it was more about chastity, about oh shoot, it was about chastity. It was about simply those who had chosen not to enter into sexual relationships. But Jesus said, "Let the children alone, and do not hinder them from coming from me, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." And that, we've said a lot about that already. And Jesus said to his disciples, "Truly I say to you, it's hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, because his mind is on riches. Root, hog, or die, knock down doors, go for your goals," right? Rich man. And yet the kingdom of heaven, if you're a very independent, self-reliant person, it's difficult to adopt the kingdom of heaven. "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers." And again, no matter at what point in life, they were all paid the same. And we'll get into all this later, but they were all paid the same. And therefore, that's the way it is with the kingdom of heaven. Whenever you adopt it, it has the same benefit. "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. Some were too busy to come, some refused him. He invited everybody of good reputation and bad, and they came." And so, an interesting parable about the kingdom of heaven, and some just don't have time to embrace it. Some don't have time to deal with it at all. "But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut off the kingdom of heaven from men, for you do not enter in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in." And that's from Woe to You, Religion, in Matthew, where he talks about what's wrong with religion. And it's simply a matter of you do not adopt this way of being, and you cannot accept this way of being. And not only that, you stand in the way of other people adopting this way of being by what you teach them and what you say to them, in order that they feel ill at ease all the time, guilty all the time. I mean, how many guilty sermons have you sat through? "Then the kingdom of heaven will be comparable to 10 virgins, and it's about getting ready. They had oil in their lamps, some did not, some prepared ahead of time, and it's about your visceral response. When the king comes, when the bridegroom came back, some were ready and some were not. Those who adopt the way to be are ready. When something happens, they got no time to think, and their visceral response, their gut reaction, their knee-jerk reaction is required of them. And that reaction is going to happen no matter what. They can't stop it. You and I all have, me and you both have, a visceral response to many things. And that visceral response is developed long in advance of that moment when it comes. And that's what he's talking about there. Well, I think that's about all I need to say about that. So let me look at the comments at the chat field, and let me look at we haven't had any tweets, and I don't see any more chats either. But we got about 5 or 6 minutes if you want to ask a question. Joni, have you got any comments or anything you'd say about any of this?
Dolly.
Joni's a person of very few words. So
if she said something wrong, I'd let you know.
Well, I think that the I think that the kingdom of heaven is a very different thing than traditional religion has taught us all these years. And that's my point. And as we get deeper and deeper into it, I think some of you all may develop a resistance to it. I don't know. I believe in the right of belief itself. I believe every person has every right to believe what they want to believe. I believe there's great comfort in thoughts of this kingdom of heaven that's beyond the clouds and has golden streets and gates of pearl and mansions and so forth, in which we'll see our demise relatives. I think that that's very true, that there is great comfort in that. But at the same time, I don't really think that's what Jesus was talking about, because there was no such concept in Jesus' day. What they thought was coming was a kingdom on earth where the Messiah was going to come and liberate them from their oppressors, and they were going to wind up with a kingdom of their own. And I know I went through those very, very fast, but I'm trying to figure out how to keep the kingdom of heaven, the phrase the kingdom of heaven, from being something that blocks you then from wanting to learn about the way to be, which is the kingdom of heaven, by the way. And you've heard many people say, I believe heaven is here and now. I believe heaven is on this earth. I believe heaven is within me. And you've heard people say that metaphorically. And I don't know exactly where they got it from, but perhaps maybe they're just internalizing that from the Bible themselves. I don't know. I know the atheists will use the kingdom of heaven as a source of sarcasm. And I know that the fundamentalist Christians will use the kingdom of heaven as a threat. They call it Pascal's wager. And the question is, do you know, if you died today, where you would spend eternity? And Pascal was a philosopher, among other things. And he thought about the idea of whether or not you believed. And if you believed, there was nothing to lose and everything to gain. But if you didn't believe, and hell was real, then there was everything to lose and nothing to gain. And so how could you possibly want to do anything but adopt this belief in this ethereal kingdom of heaven that the traditional religion has told us about? It's called Pascal's wager. And I think the worst thing that we can do in life is to adopt a belief because we're afraid not to. Think about it. Adopt a belief because we are afraid not to. That's a pretty poor reason to adopt a belief. Or adopt a belief because we want to win the lottery. We have to remember just how much Jesus taught about the problem of riches and how difficult it was to be a person of contentment with riches, and how difficult it was then for a person to enter what? The kingdom of heaven. That it's more difficult for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. And so it seems fairly obvious to me that Jesus was talking about the same thing. And when I got onto it in seminary and I realized that the traditional teachings related to heaven were not really there in the Gospels and were not really a part of what Jesus taught, or at least not depicted by the ancient writers as being a part of what Jesus taught, that kingdom of heaven was something else entirely. And if it's something else entirely, what is it? And so I began to study it in that way and began to realize then that what it was something much greater than I had ever been taught. For I could be fulfilled, and I could be wealthy in a metaphorical sense. That is, I could be content with my life and with other people, and they could be content with me. And whatever circumstances arose, illness or tragedy, financial poverty, whatever, there within that, I could find a way to be content. Paul even said it once. He said, in whatever circumstances I find myself, I find a way therein to be content. And I have a feeling that Paul understood the way, since he was rounding up these people that he called the people of the way, that later became Christians, first mentioned at Antioch. But they were not called Christians until after Jesus died. They were called the people of the way. These people of the way, if I find them, I need letters to go round them up and bring them back for trial. And that's what Paul was doing before he became involved in the movement itself. And so he said, in whatever circumstances I find myself, there within I find a way to be content. And so it sounds like the same message to me. And it's just the more you got to get into the Bible, the more you realize just how important it is. Well, we have run out of time. You guys appear to have run out of questions. Maybe we'll be able to do better next week because we won't be going so fast. But you guys have a great week, and thanks for joining us again.